I call the Honourable Member Jan Logie. Tēnā koe, Miss Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. It's with sadness that I rise again to oppose another ill-conceived piece of welfare legislation through this House. The Green Party opposes the Social Security Debt and Fraud Recovery Bill without apology or prevarication. This bill essentially does three things. It creates a new fraud offences. It makes the partner liable for fraud debt, and it requires the Crown to recover debt and reduces their discretion on how. And this is the point that we find most offensive. And before anyone on that side of the House starts to yell that the Greens are soft on fraud or crime or any other rubbish like that, I would like to remind this House we already have a rigorous fraud detection and prosecution system in this country. This bill is just adding extra offences and penalties that are even tougher than in other related laws, with no evidence that it will have any deterrent effect on fraud, because that does not necessarily have anything to do with the drivers of fraud and welfare. The Greens take stewardship of our collective resources very seriously. That is why we want to use our resources in a way that will most effectively deliver our goal of a New Zealand where everyone has the essentials so that we can guarantee the opportunities. We are working for a social security system that provides everyone with enough income to fully participate in their community and to live safe, healthy lives. This would be what a real investment approach would look like, and it would save us money in the long run. We support policies that are sufficient to ensure this, simple to understand and access, universal in their application, and equitable within a wider social context. We oppose this bill as it is not consistent with these values or this vision. This bill will, we believe, further stigmatise the most marginalised people in this country and put more barriers in the way of people trying to get out of poverty without making any tangible difference in relation to serious intentional fraud. There is, however, an aspect of this bill where I believe the intention is positive and where we share the concern of submitters and others in this House. We do acknowledge that the current system of reclaiming the entire debt from the beneficiary, usually the woman, when the partner has also benefited from that money directly or indirectly, is unjust. We are also concerned that currently violent partners are regularly using the threat of informing on a woman as a tool of abuse. This is easy for them because currently the consequences fall entirely on the woman holding the benefit. However, we would like to see a policy or legislative response to this problem developed based on the experiences of those women and those beneficiaries who have been affected, which also involves women's refuge, to ensure that we have an approach that is fair and safe. This law has not been developed on that basis, and there is concern that it may actually have the reverse effect. And I would really like to mention the Minister in his opening speech spoke about the point where somebody goes from being able to be in a relationship with somebody and receive a benefit, like the DPB, to the point where it moves over into being a relationship that they need to report. And I would like to ask anyone in this House how they know when it's reached that point. The law defines the point you need to be where you can no longer be on the DPB, as when you're in a relationship in the nature of marriage. And that is defined quite specifically by our courts as a relationship where now let me just find that in my notes, where there's financial and emotional commitment, and where you're willing to pay the other person's bills. Now, I've never been in a relationship where the relationship has gone on to go to a point where I've gone, now, has my commitment reached a level where I'm willing to pay their bills? That's never happened to me. And yet, we are talking about giving people criminal convictions for not having identified that point and reported it to an agency. That is what the point of fairness in this bill is based around, that expectation. It's unrealistic. And that has very, very real life consequences for people in our communities. And I just don't think that's good law. I don't think it's fair. And the Green Party also shares the New Zealand Law Society's concern regarding joint and several liability, which means that both parties will be liable for the whole debt should both parties be accountable for the debt arising from the fraud. The New Zealand Law Society believes this may lead to unfair or disproportionate outcomes. In their view, liability should be shared on the basis of attribution of benefits as per the Criminal Proceeds Recovery Act 2009. This has been dismissed as a policy, in part due to the cost or potential increase in reviews and appeals. The Green Party believes it is essential that our laws are fair and proportionate and open to appeal. To decide on a legislative pathway to reduce the possibility of people appealing them is not founded on a strong concept of justice. This bill also creates an offence for partners knowingly or recklessly benefiting from fraud committed by their partner, punishable by a fine of up to $5,000 or a 12 months imprisonment. The Green Party does not believe this is necessary, and that attributing criminal liability on the basis of determinations of relationship status, as I've already outlined, are incredibly problematic, may well create perverse results, and that is being kind. But the two aspects of the bill that we find the most difficult, actually, is the change that in this bill that requires MSD to recover debt. And I need to make sure that this House in New Zealand is aware that we're not talking about fraud here. We're talking about advances that people have had to get because the benefit levels were consciously set below the poverty line, and that they are not enough for people to survive on. And we know that people on basic benefits cannot afford well-balanced diets. They cannot afford to heat their houses or to stop them or their children getting sick. Most of them cannot afford new clothing for their children, cannot afford to replace shoes when they get holes in them. They cannot afford to repair their bikes or cars if they break down. They cannot even, where I live in Porirua, afford the bus or the train from Porirua into Wellington. They certainly can't afford sports fees or club fees, or being able to get admissions into places of education within our city. As we're not talking about fraud, Mr. Saban. This is debt where benefits are set so low that people have to get advances that they have to pay back to be able to put food on the table, to be able to put their power on through winter. And I've even heard of people being refused advances to buy blankets to try and have a cheaper option to keep themselves and their children warm. That is at the heart of the problem with this bill, is that it does not acknowledge the fact that we are putting people into poverty that is harming them and their children. And this bill is seeking to take money out of the pockets of those very people who are just trying to provide the very essentials of life. And that is unconscionable.